Hello and welcome back to Life on the Wrist. This is the first episode of Season 6. Season 6 is obviously being kicked off by the new year. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had a wonderful holiday season and that 2025 has started off well for you. It's pretty incredible to me. I know I did this in the last episode, but I just want to take a moment. It's pretty incredible to me that we're already going into Season 6 of this podcast. I'm pretty sure our first season was back in 2020, kind of during the COVID era of watches. You know, we obviously have been around since 2017, but we're now going into Season 6, and it's pretty incredible to think that we've kind of continued this. I'm very excited for this season. I think this year is going to be a very interesting one. I think if we kind of just reflect, before we kind of get into some of the stories that I want to talk about, if we kind of just reflect over the last 6 years of watches, I think, especially considering when Season 1 sort of started, it really started off from the, when there was a lot of enthusiasm for wristwatches, and, people during COVID era had a lot of time on their hands, and they had the opportunity to research pieces that maybe, or not research pieces, but they really were able to research niches of interests that perhaps they weren't into before, but they had a lot more time on their hands and they had the opportunity to research some of those things. And I think that time really led to this really big boom in interest for watches. And I think we gained two things. We gained, I think, people who are true enthusiasts, people who truly do love watchmaking and watches, and whether that's vintage or modern. But then I think we also saw kind of in some way a little bit of a maturity, or I guess the watch industry sort of mature a little bit if you compare it to things like, especially in the vintage world, if you compare it to things like art or music or wine collecting. I think there was some maturity that it gained since that time. Obviously, watch prices have driven a lot of the enthusiasm around these items that we love so much. We have seen prices sort of level off, or I guess come down from those sort of pandemic highs that we had. And through that process, I think it weeded out a lot of people who were just in it for that, for the wrong reasons, and kind of the people who were in it for the right reasons kind of stayed around. And I think as we go into 2026, it's going to be interesting to see how things develop. I think prices are sort of leveling off now. I don't, and this is a bold projection to make, but I don't anticipate sort of the broader market to sell off as much this year. I'd say we're probably going to see some stability in the prices of these pieces. Obviously, a lot of what happens this year is going to be driven by what watch brands release, and that will be an interesting thing to watch for. Especially, I think blue dials was a big craze last year, and it'll be interesting to see how things develop. If we think about vintage watches, I think people have been a lot more open to smaller sizes of pieces, and I'm curious to see how what happens this year. Obviously, it's going to be driven by perhaps some of the modern pieces that are released, but also what comes to market, and that's always sort of an exciting thing to have to wait on, because it builds the anticipation around the vintage watch sort of niche, and that's always exciting. So I'm looking forward to this year. I think it's going to be a great one. I think on Life on the Wrist, if I think about sort of what we're going to be heading into for the year, I can kind of give you some information. I apologize, I bumped the mic there, but I can give you some information about what to expect this year. So I think this year, last year what we did was, I think we had a ton of diversity in the watches that we purchased and showcased on our YouTube channel as well as lifeonthewrist.com. And that sourcing was really great because it allowed us to really explore a lot of the things that we love about this hobby, which is a lot of the breadth that you can get from different brands and different eras of watchmaking. I think this year what we're probably going to be doing is being maybe a less broad and maybe a little bit more specific on getting some pieces in that really showcase the incredible watchmaking of a brand, of an era, and to be very specific and very targeted in the watches that we are going to cover on our website, our podcast, our YouTube channel, and all of our social medias. We'll cover, at the end of this podcast, I'll cover the first piece that we will be covering on lifeonthewrist.com. You'll see that this week if you're listening to this when this podcast comes out. You'll probably have seen this watch on our Instagram if you do follow us there. There'll be links in the description if you need any of that information. But we'll let you know about the piece and just give you a brief background of this watch and why we decided to cover it on the channel. Before we get into it, I know we're only like 5 days into this year, but I think it's important to kick it off with some interesting things that we did see. Come out over the last maybe let's say couple weeks. Not a ton happening. I think everyone kind of takes a moment to take a break, have some time to regenerate, have a little bit of a good recuperation in December as we go into the new year. I'll start off with an article. Ironically, I was on BBC, and there was an article that was written on December 26th, and it is titled "The Nigerian Watch Lover Lost in Time." I won't sort of give you a whole rundown of the article, but I'll give you kind of a brief overview. The article covered an individual whose name is Bala Muhammad, who is located in the northern Nigerian city of Kaduna, and he is a watchmaker, watch repairman, and the story kind of catalogs how he got into watchmaking, his life as a watchmaker over the last 50 years, and then it sort of transitions to talking about how his life has changed pretty significantly over the last, let's just say, 10 years with his career as a watchmaker. And the long and short of it, and you can probably guess where this is actually going, is it kind of describes that this 65-year-old once saw a huge boom in his business where he would sometimes get as many as 100 wristwatch repair jobs in a day. And now he's actually seeing there are days where he doesn't see any customers enter his store. And this is obviously something that I think watchmaking across geographies is seeing and has seen for many years now. And Bala Muhammad kind of cites the fact that people are using their mobile phones to check the time, and that has kind of declined the trade for him. Because phones and technology, this is a direct quote, "Phones and technology have taken away the only job I know, and it makes me very sad." And this was an interesting article, especially because I'm not sure a ton of you are actually located in the Nigerian market, but it's a good point of reference to say that it isn't just in the places where you are living where this is happening. It happens across geographies, across socioeconomic classes, and it's something it's happening. One of the things that I wanted to kind of mention as I kind of spoke through this article, and there will be a link in the description of this podcast to the article, so I encourage you to go ahead and read the article yourself. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about with this article is the idea of supporting watchmaking as a trade. There are many ways that you can do that. There are many societies that basically have their main goal is to keep the watchmaking trade alive, and whether that's through research, through having libraries, through sponsoring new watchmakers. And if you have some sort of resolution that you want to have this year, I encourage you to support one of those organizations. If you are located, you don't have to be located in the US, but I think a really great option for you if you are looking to support this type of organization is the Horological Society of New York, which is one of the oldest horological societies in the world, and they have an incredible way of supporting the trade. I think one of the things that they do is they do essentially scholarships for watchmakers or up and coming watchmakers who want to learn the trade and become a watchmaker. That's one way to do it. They also have an incredible library if you are located or traveling through the New York City region. You can go and visit their library, which has an incredible array of horological texts and research that is incredibly helpful as we try to document this hobby as watch enthusiasts. And they also do fun things, like they have fun events that you can be a part of. They also have really cool talks every month. They have a speaker that comes, and I'm going to go through one of them here shortly. The one that's coming up here shortly, but there are ways that these organizations are trying to encourage people to support this trade, because as a watch enthusiast, someone's going to have to repair the watch. Someone has to have the knowledge of all of the if you want to say it, the nuts and bolts of the things that we love so much. Even though watchmaking has come a long way since perhaps the 1930s, 1940s, if that's the time period of vintage watches you like to collect. Modern watches are great. Technology has come a long way, and they're very, very well made nowadays, especially if you're buying from reputable brands. However, there will come a time where that watch does need to be repaired, or that watch does need to be serviced. There also, if you want to think about it this way, those watches have to be made, and you need watchmakers to be able to do that. And that's why I just wanted to call this out. Sure, it is. This article kind of describes this sort of dying trade, but there are ways that we can support it and make sure that it stays alive, so that so that there continues to be people like Bala Muhammad who can use his knowledge and his skills to keep our hobby alive. It's not like we're dying anytime soon, but it is something that we always have to be conscious about as we look forward, especially at the beginning of a year like this. So speaking of the Horological Society of New York, I wanted to just quickly give a shout out to the upcoming event that's taking place in January. There will be a talk given by Richard Newman, who will be discussing the early American pocket watches, and this is in conjunction with the fact that HSNY is going to have an exhibit that shows 125 years of American watchmaking. And some of the pocket watches that are photographed in their article, or I guess their release of the fact that this is going to be happening, is they're absolutely spectacular to look at. Really, really beautiful pocket watches, and to think some of these watches are, over 100 years old, it's just super mesmerizing. There's a pocket watch that was made. I think it was made in New York, and I think it's cased in something like I think it's steel, with a really beautiful dial, silver dial with a subsidiary seconds. It's just really beautiful to look at some of these pocket watches, and I'll leave a link in the show notes, or in the show notes of this podcast too, where you can find their sort of a release for the lecture, because on that release you will be able to see some of the watches that I'm kind of talking about. If you don't know who Richard Newman is, he's the Chair Emeritus and Star Fellow of the National Association of Watch and Clock Collectors. He's also Freeman of the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers and a director of the American Clock and Watch Museum. He's led the NAWCC British Horology chapter and the US section of the Antiquarian Horology Society based in London. He's got his own website that'll obviously be in the description of this video for you to see, and the lecture is taking place on January 9th, 2025. If you're a member of the Horological Society of New York, you will be able to, I think, get the recording essentially straight away when it is released if you are not located in New York. If you're not a part of the Horological Society of New York, you'll have to wait a few months before that is released, but they release the the lectures on YouTube, so you can see that a little bit later. But a really cool thing happening, and I guess one of the early events of 2025. Not a whole lot going on this first week, but that'll be one of the events. All right, one of the things that did happen this year, I think it's probably the first new watch that we're going to be covering, is the second release from Phil Toledano and Alfred Chen from their it's the second release after their B/1 or B1 that was released in the spring, and they've basically created this new model called the B1.2, which has a Tahitian mother of pearl dial, which also has an asymmetrical sapphire crystal on it, which is really, really cool. I first saw this on Phil Toledano's Instagram page. If you don't follow him, I encourage you to do so. But what's really cool about this piece is the mother of pearl dial. Super, super nice. Obviously going to be unique for each of the different dials or each of the different watches that are produced, because no two mother of pearl dials are going to look the same. But what is really cool is to be able to see the asymmetrical crystal that they've put on this, which kind of aligns a little bit more with the design elements of this piece. What they've also done is they've, I think, created a new-ish strap, or I guess new-ish bracelet for this watch, I believe, which I think makes it a little bit more comfortable, and I think it's a new clasp as well. So that's quite cool to see, and obviously this watch kind of took the world by storm, especially the watches that sold, or the piece unique that sold at Sotheby's, which is quite cool. And I think there was another one that sold to benefit the Swiss Institute. So really cool, definitely a cool piece that they released. One of the things that I want to do a little bit more is, a lot of the times kind of reflecting on how I talk about these pieces. A lot of the times I'm telling you about what's great about it, but one of the things I want to do is have some sort of counter argument to what I have to say, and that's something that I want to start doing in these watches. So I think I've mentioned, I think it's a cool case design. I think it's really cool that they've got an asymmetrical crystal, and I love the mother of pearl dial. Personally, it's not really my aesthetic. I think a little bit too. While there are angles to the piece, I don't really like how the strap sort of integrates with it. It kind of feels like you're wearing a bracelet more than a watch. And then the other thing I would mention is it's running on a Sellita SW100. Fantastic movement, but I kind of like something a little bit more interesting, or something that might be a little bit more interesting to learn about from sort of a, movement manufacturing perspective. So those would be maybe two things that I would describe as constructive criticism, I guess. But still, wonderful piece, super, super cool. I definitely wouldn't be covering it if I didn't think it was a cool piece. They will go on sale in March, so you'll have a couple months to wait, and I don't believe it's a limited edition. So, definitely keep your eyes out if you're interested in that. All right, the last thing I wanted to discuss is actually a really exciting bit of news that happened late last year that I haven't covered on Life on the Wrist, and that is about a new sort of a vintage watch dealer, vintage watch expert, and I really wanted to cover this because I think what this person does is incredibly cool, and I really want to just showcase this on the podcast. Okay, so if you are on Instagram, you probably have stumbled across an Instagram of the Boucheron guy, or his handle is the Watch Am. If you haven't, there's going to be a link in the description to the Watch Am, so definitely check out his Instagram. But this is the personal Instagram, or the Watch Am is the personal Instagram of Alexander Tritz, who is a strapmaker and really a vintage watch scholar. And one of the things I really fell in love with the pieces that he showcased on his Instagram was a lot of them had to do with, well, first off, incredible photography, first off. Second off, a lot of the watches that he featured were watches that maybe aren't sort of mainstream or super mainstream, but they have incredibly cool case designs or dial designs, or, that type of realm where you have something interesting, something a little bit different about the specific piece. And obviously, the Watch Am sort of showcases his personal collection of cool vintage watches, and it has a ton of following. I absolutely love and adore the watches that he posts, and it's one of my favorite Instagrams definitely one of my favorite Instagrams. Anyway, Alexander Tritz decided that he was actually going to kind of go in a little bit more into the sort of dealing, sort of buying and selling. I think just selling, but I'm not really sure on the buying side, but kind of go into the sort of the dealer world. And he created an Instagram called Galbe, or Galbe Gallery is the handle. And the idea here is this is going to be fine watches, jewelries, and leather straps page where he is going to sell some of the pieces that he has come across in his many years of collecting. If you don't know French, galbe is a French word that describes, I think it's directly translated to curve. And if you look at the pieces that he showcased, what you have is watches with really interesting case designs where you have super cool curved edges or, interesting lug designs. And it really does come across in the pieces that he has sold so far on this Instagram page. The most recent watch that he has listed is a really, really cool Rolex Precision in 18 karat gold. He says that it's actually from his personal collection, and it's an 18 karat pink gold, and it was made for the French market. What's really cool about this piece is it's got this really Art Deco case design and incredibly cool sort of lug design with these. It's kind of a tank style watch, right? But then you have these really cool lugs that are quite angular, and then you have this sort of bridge that goes from the case over to the lug. You have to see the pictures of it. There's going to be a link in the description for you to see this watch. It also has really cool mirror hour markers on this silver dial with Roman numerals. The Art Deco case was actually, and I'm kind of just reading his description here, but the Art Deco case was made in Paris in the atelier of Robert Lerck, and is 22 millimeters by 40 millimeters. And it's believed that very few Rolex watches were made in France when the ban of imported gold started after World War II. And if you look at the serial number, it's confirmed that it's really low production of this specific piece. Obviously, one of the things that you get with the watches that are being sold here is the fact that incredible condition. And if you are interested in purchasing these types of watches, I encourage you to go and check these out. What's really cool, he's brand agnostic, so he's really looking at pieces that across all brands are incredibly cool from a design perspective, really, really great histories, and incredible condition. So I'll leave a link in the description to the Boucheron guys and also the Galbe Gallery for you to check those out if you haven't seen them already. All right, last but not least, I did promise you that we were going to cover one watch that is sort of kicking off 2025 for us, for the watches that we're going to be covering on lifeonthewrist.com, as well as the Life on the Wrist YouTube channel. As a reminder, there will be links in the show notes of this podcast to both of those platforms, as well as our social medias. The first watch of 2025, drumroll please, is a Heuer Big Eye chronograph. This watch was manufactured in 1945 or thereabouts, and can be described as sort of their pre-Carrera models. If you don't know, a lot of collectors will refer to chronographs manufactured by Heuer as sort of pre and post Carrera. There obviously are many other chronograph models that Heuer produced, but this sort of pre-post Carrera is sort of describing the very sort of archetypal chronograph that Heuer produced in the Carrera model. This watch was manufactured in 1945, as I mentioned, and I think the Carrera was launched in 1963, I want to say. And what makes this watch really special and really got me excited is actually the dial as well as the case design. So 33.5 millimeter case, it's in 18 karat gold, and one of the things that really stood out to me was it's a 33.5 millimeter case, but it's got these claw lugs that are double stepped, which give the watch a little bit more dimension than sort of a traditional 33.5 millimeter watch. This is a Big Eye, so it's a 2 register chronograph, one at 9, one at 3 o'clock, and the dial of this watch has aged super, super well. It has this sort of even layer of golden brown sort of patina. I know if you're into vintage watches, that word has kind of become taboo ever since Tony Tran has said we gotta have a New Year's resolution to not use the word patina. But it's this sort of golden brown layer of color that's sort of been aged into the dial. That's quite nice. I would imagine it was probably a white dial when it was originally released, and that contrasted with the gold case is just super, super attractive. One of the downsides about it is the case back is not original to the watch. The case back is actually in stainless steel, unfortunately. It was probably replaced maybe when a service happened. Maybe the case was worn through, or perhaps the owner of the watch lost the case back. But super, super nice dial. What's really cool about it, you've got blue steeled hands. You've got this luminescent material that's sort of aged on the hour markers, and then the luminescent material for the hours hand has fallen out completely, and then the minutes hand, what you have is a little bit of luminescent material towards the beginning of the dial, and then as you move sort of towards the outside of the end of the hand, some of it has started to fall off. So it gives it a little bit of a cool look as well. Another thing that's really cool about this piece is it's running on the Valjoux 23 movement. If you are kind of into watch movements, this is probably one of the most important watch movements ever produced, especially for chronograph movements. It was originally launched, I think, in 1916 and was manufactured all the way through the 1970s. And what's pretty incredible to think is that is a very long time for one movement to be used, especially when you consider some of the movements that we've spoken about where they've only been used for a couple of years. But only 125 or about 125,000 movements were manufactured. So that's a really low production quantity when you consider how long this movement was used for. So it kind of makes it somewhat rare, and it's also a movement that has been used in Patek Philippe 2499's, Rolex Daytonas. It's a very, very important movement and not one to miss. So I'm looking forward to covering this on our YouTube channel so you can see some more of this watch in person, or I guess in film, and then obviously it's going to be covered on our Instagram and all of our social medias, as well as an article will be written on this piece for lifeonthewrist.com. So stay tuned for that. But if you want to see some pictures of this watch, I encourage you to go to the link in the description of this podcast for you to check it out. And with that said, I think we'll wrap up the first episode of season 6 of the Life on the Wrist podcast. I'm very, very excited for this year. As I mentioned, super happy for you all to be here, and I'm looking forward to what is to come in 2025. If you are new to the Life on the Wrist podcast, be sure to follow us and share this podcast with a friend who might be interested in watches. It really does help the channel grow, and I would be greatly appreciative of all the support that you would be able to show. And if you wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. It gives me some feedback on what you want to hear, especially as we go into the new year. So leave a rating if you wouldn't mind. And with that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.